Dr. Tio Baboon is Director of Outreach Aid to the Americas, a ministry that serves churches in Central America and the Caribbean, and he joins us now from Miami. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do.
Absolutely. Well, tell us what conditions have been like for the church under the Maduro regime.
Well, it's been very difficult. You know, under Maduro, the church has been persecuted. The church has seen its expression of worship being attacked. Even the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has called for Venezuela to join now Cuba and Nicaragua as the three countries that in the Americas should be criminalized who are criminalizing basic expression of freedom of religion and should be punished because of that and sanctioned because of that. So it's been a very difficult road for the evangelical church, for the Christian church in Venezuela. In addition to that, the church was divided. Became divided, and so that's created an additional sense of concern as we move forward towards a potential transition in the government.
Interesting. The church leaders would be divided. Well, do they expect that their situation will improve under the new government? Well,
that's a great question, because what's happening is that even as you just played some of the results of how the government is going through a transition, what they're saying and how they're negotiating with the United States, the evangelicals are responding with caution. They're not celebrating. They're asking for prayer, for discernment. They're very concerned about the protection of civilians as the main issue. Things are not super clear. There are some, however, who are very staunchly calling for a moral reckoning within the church, asking those churches that became aligned with the regime that was oppressing religious freedom to move aside and to step aside so that the church can begin a restoration process and basically an ethical reconstruction of the nation that they would like to pursue. But overall, it's asking for prayer and being very cautious.
Dr. Baboon, you're from Cuba. The communist government of Cuba is dependent on Venezuela for support. It also persecutes the church. What are you hearing from Christian leaders in Cuba about the possibility of the government falling there, and how might that affect the church?
Well, the church in Cuba is watching with a lot of concern and a lot of hope. Unfortunately, the Cuban government has reacted to what's happening in Venezuela with an increased amount of surveillance, pressure, and restriction to church leaders right now. They're very concerned that the church leaders in the country who are very active in bringing people to worship services and to get messages along, that they would say the wrong thing according to the government and get the people excited and perhaps create problems for the government, so that they are increasing the amount of restriction. At the same time, the churches are very optimistic that this will end with some type of a transition in Cuba. And overall, I think that the overall arching message that we're seeing from both Venezuela, Cuba, and now Nicaragua is that the church leaders are looking at this and are saying, goodness, God has not forgotten the church. With all the suffering that we had for so many years and all the restriction and all the violations against the churches, in the case of Cuba, 60-some years, in the case of Venezuela, 20-some years, and Nicaragua, likewise, they're saying God did not forget. God has always been faithful, and so things will change.
Amen. Amen. That is a great place to leave it. Dr. Tio Baboon, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Miami. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.